From Washington to Warsaw, Paris to Ankara, Brussels, Berlin, Bucharest, and Belgrade. Through pandemics and political movements, cooperation and confrontation, digital divides, and defending democracy. The German Marshall Fund is at the pulse of transatlantic relations today, convening the experts and insights needed to navigate tomorrow's world.
Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Katz, Director of Democracy Initiatives at the German Marshall Fund. We want to thank you for joining us today for this conversation. I want to thank all of our speakers as well for joining us. We have a really a packed and really stellar panel of speakers, and we really want to get to them. I just wanted to say that we want to welcome you, and I know we have those that are joining us from both Washington, Brussels, Warsaw, and Minsk, and we really appreciate, especially during this time and period, a busy period and a tenuous one, to have such a great audience joining us, people interested, focused on Belarus, and that's what we're focused on today. And GMF has a long history of engaging both in Eastern Europe, but also in Belarus, and a real interest in what happens in Belarus. And I think we all, over the last several days have seen extraordinary images of both protests of Belarusians speaking out for their desire for change after 26 years of rule by Mr. Lukashenka. But we've also seen the dark side of those that have been imprisoned, tortured, injured, deaths. And now we're seeing various other aspects of this play out after the election took place on August 9th. And so today's conversation is as much about keeping Belarus in the spotlight, talking about what has taken place over the last several days, what will take place in the near future, and of course, the question is how can there be a transition, one that's nonviolent, and what are the geopolitical aspects that are playing out as we speak, including this past week calls by Mr. Lukashenko to bring Russia into this situation, extraordinary meetings of the EU regarding potential for sanctions. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, was in Warsaw speaking directly to this issue only several hundred miles away, with deep concerns about human rights violations and support for Belarusians and their desire to chart a course for their own future. So we're really here today to talk about a number of these issues, and I want to thank colleagues who are coming in, including my colleague Jörg Feubrich, who's in GMF's Berlin's office, who's one of the foremost experts on Belarus. Also want to thank RFE for lending us two of their best, focused both in Minsk and outside on what's taking place in Belarus. And I also just want to thank Veronica Laputska, who's also my colleague working in Warsaw. This is a joint event today between GMF's Washington office and Warsaw office. So we really thank everybody from Warsaw to DC at GMF who helped pull this together. Before we start, I just wanted to do a brief housekeeping too. As many of you know, on Zoom, you'll see the speakers. The speakers will not see you. There's a Q&A function on Zoom that you can pose questions throughout the entire event. So we ask that you do that. We'll have a Q&A session after our speakers and our panelists start us off. And so really, please do that throughout. We want to hear from you, but we also want to hear from our experts right now. So what I want to do is I want to send it over to Veronica in Warsaw to pick up from here. Veronica, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Great to hear and see you all here, dear guests, dear speakers. I'm really thankful that during these turbulent times, you all managed to find some time because you all are working a lot in Belarus at the moment, we know, and to join our event. So today we have a brilliant constellation of speakers, as often we do. I would start to introduce our introduction with Anna Maria Diner, who is an analyst and specializing on Belarus and Russia security policy, working for the Polish Institute for International Affairs, or PISM in Polish. We also have Dr. Jörg Forbrig joining us from our Berlin office, who is the director for Central and Eastern Europe and one of the most prominent experts in Belarus, on Belarus in Europe. And we have also two brilliant representatives of Belarusian service of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. It's Konstantin Kastus-Lashkevich, who is based in Minsk and who is a managing editor there, and also Alexei Zatkevich, who is based outside Belarus. So all of us are here united to give you most recent data and information, what is happening, to discuss the current trends, and to be able to also provide some recommendations to both the EU and the US and to our transatlantic audience as well. So I would like to start giving the word to Kastus because we were briefly discussing that as he's based in Minsk, unlike all of us at the moment, he can actually share with us the current mood of people there, and he can also point out what is the difference between today and the days which have been preceding today. So Kastus, over to you. Please give us a short introduction and share with us what is happening in terms of strikes, which Belarusian officials seem to be joining the protest and seem to be vocal in terms of violations and rigid elections results. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be here. This amazing panel of experts. So to begin with, I'd like to share some thoughts or feelings, how it's felt or how it looks from Minsk at the moment today. So today, I would say that Minsk, first day in the week, Minsk looks almost like a regular city. And not the one amid some political crisis or some kind of revolution. It seems to me, at least to me, that after the enormous euphoria of the Freedom March on Sunday and a week-long protest activities of different nature, Belarusians found themselves a bit tired and lost. As they would say, today you don't see people lining up in solidarity chains along the main avenues in Minsk and other cities. You don't hear non-stop car honking protests turned into more like local pickets with a relatively small number of participants. It's on one hand. On the other hand, we see some growing worker strikes, and the key question at the moment is there is some hope for growing protests, for building up the protests with the help of worker people. Well, there is no direct answer to this question. Well, for now, there are only two large state-run manufacturing companies announced political strike as it is. These are Belaruskali, based in Saligorsk, which is one of the largest manufacturers and exporters of potash fertilizers in the world, and with a staff of 15,000 workers. And the other one is the Belarusian Steel Works, based in Zhodina, with a staff of 10,000 people. So other manufacturing giants, state-run giants in Belarus that are pillars of so-called socially oriented economy of Lukashenka, they don't really proclaim any strikes, any full-time or full-fledged strikes. People say they are threatened by their administrations, sometimes they are bribed, and some of them don't have really much hope on how Lukashenko could be defeated in this way. There's also a very important question the political leadership at the moment and how it could affect people intentions. For now, it's one of the pillar question in this Belarusian peaceful protest, because after Tikhanovskaya left or was pushed out of Belarus, the protests kicked off. It was quite widespread thought among Belarusians on the street that we don't really need a leader to organize a protest. But now, after this 9-day long protest of different types, it's kind of obvious, at least for me, that people found themselves in some kind of deadlock. Yes, there are thousands, hundreds of us, and we can go on the streets and we can show our position peacefully. But Lukashenko, he's not the one who's going to resign. He's not going to give up his powers. And his people, all the high-profile officials, they don't really want to quit as well. They don't show any signs of support with the protests, with the solidarity chains, so on and so on. So it looked like, at least a couple of days ago, Tikhanovskaya's return could be a next stage of this protest. Could be a triumph at some point, but it's still not very clear whether she's ready for this. And at least so far, it's obvious that her team of supporters wasn't really successful in persuading her to come back in Belarus and somehow formalize the leadership of these protests, to take this many people's intentions into something more concrete and impolitical. I also like to add that it was an amazing number of people protesting in the regions, because of course, especially for foreign countries, it's mostly Minsk, and it's huge crowds, but in all the largest cities in Belarus, all the regional capitals like Brest, Grodno, Gomel, Vitebsk, and Mogilev, up to 20,000 people came on streets every single day, and they protested and they demanded Lukashenko's resign and a stop of the violence on behalf of all these people, who've been detained and arrested. So they tried to organize some kind of dialogue with the local authorities, leaders, but had no luck. So Lukashenko's people are still have no doubts in supporting him, and we don't really see how it could be resolved. I think that's enough for the starting points for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Kastuts, for this very insightful but brief introduction. I would just like to remind our participants that we will be, of course, collecting the questions throughout the session and addressing them in the end. But as they have already started to kind of come in, I will be trying to incorporate them as much as I can to my questions to the panelists. So please feel free to keep going. Thank you. So Alexei, I would like now to probably to talk a little bit about the recent data. We know that there have been, from what we know, at least 7,000 of detainees. 4,000 of them are still in jail. There is about 100 of people missing. The number of dead people is arguable. Could you please provide us some information about this, and also, of course, about all those journalists who also were objects of this, subjects of this repression machine taking place in Belarus during the last 9 days?
Thank you. It's an honor to be here at this event, this panel. But I would like to start with this big picture. Maybe many of you already know these things, but I think it's important to recall that these actions of the Belarusian security forces in the first days after the elections, they did not look like a police operation. It was more of a pacification operation at the occupied territory. It was an attempt to scare the conquered people with brutal force. So they were shooting people with rubber bullets, with flashbang grenades, often without any provocation at all. And they were beaten, they were brutally torturing thousands of people in police vans and jails, and they may be still torturing these people who are still in detention. But this massive violence in the first days, it actually backfired, at least in the short term. People did not stop the protest, and even those who had not protested got really angry with the government. And I totally agree with Kastus that the strikes are the key at the moment. It all hangs in the balance. It very much depends on what will happen at the industrial enterprises. For me, the important point was on Wednesday. The internet was blocked and is still partially blocked, but we were receiving messages, photos, and videos of protests from all around Belarus through our Telegram channel. And I got a video from Himbalakno, a large chemical enterprise in the city of Grodno. Workers were talking to their boss, and then one of them started shouting, "Hey guys, who of you voted for Lukashenka?" And there was silence, and then he shouted again, "And who of you voted for Tikhanovskaya?" And the hands got up, and people started chanting, "Long live Belarus." And by the end of the last week and early this week, some key enterprises were having political demands. They had rallies, and Kastus said that the full-fledged strikes are on Belkali and on the Belarusian metallurgical plant in Zlobin, but also there are some big enterprises where they still have political unrest and partial strikes, including these chemical enterprises in Grodno and Polotsk. So very much depends on if this coordinating council, if these people who are basically from the second string of the opposition, because the first string is in jail and the political prisoners are still in jail, if they manage to co-opt the people from the striking committees all around the country, I think politically it's the main point. And actually the main demands of this political strike in Soligorsk is release of detained protesters, political prisoners, investigation of violence and torture by the security forces, and the third is resignation of Alexander Lukashenka. And when Lukashenka came to this Minsk wheeled tractor plant yesterday, he spoke to the workers. He said, "I was not going to give away the power," but some of the workers shouted at him, "Go away," openly. It was unimaginable before. Lukashenko replied that he will give his power, not give his power even if he's dead. But today he gave a long list of awards to the so-called Siloviki, including some people from riot police and people from jails. And they published 25 pages of the names on the official website. I think it's not only the message of the society, they not only try to scare the society, but it's also the message to the awarded themselves. Okay, guys, I published your names. Everybody knows who you are. Everybody knows what you've done. If you don't stick with me, if I drown, you drown with me. People will take your revenge on you and your families. So I think the message was mainly to the security forces. So far, there's been no high-scale defections, some low-scale defections from the diplomatic corps, state bureaucracy, from the security forces. And today, the authorities are preparing pro-Lukashenko rallies in the regional cities of Gomel and Mogilov. Lukashenko spoke at a similar rally on Sunday, and I think one important point from there is he totally abandoned any pretense of this geopolitical balance. It was totally about how West is pure evil again. He spoke of black-skinned, yellow-mouthed, and blonde NATO soldiers who threatened Belarus. And of course, they returned the detained Wagner soldiers, private company soldiers to Russia. So he twice already addressed Putin, discussed the possibility for Russian military help. I didn't have too much time to follow Russian propaganda narrative, but so far it looks that Kremlin is reluctant to back him military. And the Kremlin media actually reported on police violence and torture in Belarus, including the beatings of the Russians. And I will finish with saying that today, there's no chance that the situation will come back to the status quo of 6 months ago. It will be either removing Lukashenko from power, or Belarus will be this full-fledged fascist-type military and police dictatorship. Maybe I didn't answer the question about there's a lot of people still in detention. The Ministry of Internal Affairs does not recognize some of them. They do not recognize about 100 people missing. They are saying that some of the people had disappeared before, even before the 9th. And they also do not recognize the fact by the the claims by the human rights organizations that at least 5 people died and 7 were totally like had almost deathly injuries during these protests. They officially recognize only 2 deaths so far.
Thank you very much, Alexei, for all this. I wanted to ask you one thing about the list of these military officials who were awarded. Don't you think that this was also some sort of kind of provocation so that people actually can start, especially those relatives of those detainees, can start chasing such people and their families, and perhaps this can provoke another oppressed, more aggressive one, in contrast to the previous peaceful protests happening in Belarus, because this is also one of the versions why they actually did it now.
It might have been one of the reasons, but I think the main 2 reasons was to show to the people that he is not weakened, that he still has power. And the main reason for me was to show to these people themselves that they are part of this regime, that they should be scared of what they have done and they should stick with him.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, Kostuś has to leave us. Thanks a lot, Kostuś. Please stay safe and take care. And we'll be, of course, in touch with you. Let us know how things are going there.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Yes, so now I would like to ask our brilliant speaker from Warsaw, Anna Maria Dinar, to talk a little bit about something we've already mentioned, so this so-called Russian card. Why do you think Anna Lukashenko keeps playing it? And could you please give us a little bit of insights on what is the position of Russian elites regarding their possible intervention of Russia to Belarus? What kind of intervention can it be, if it can be one? And also, could you please give us a little bit of kind of oversight on what is the perception of this type of acts in the Russian media so far, and in the public? How do you think or it feels within the broader Russian population, this kind of events happening in Belarus?
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. Starting immediately for your question about Russian reactions. Is strange, I will say, on one hand, because Russia is trying to act very carefully. It rather doesn't want to interfere. It stands outside of everything what is going on in Belarus, but the reason is very visible, that those marches, those gatherings of people were no anti-Russian. There is also no anti-Russian mood within Belarusian society. And Russia doesn't want to change it. So that is why Russia is rather waiting for what will be going on in Belarus. Nowadays, the scenario and what is going on plays for Putin and Russia, because for them, the best scenario was to have very weak Lukashenko with closed doors to the EU, to Western countries, with almost no legitimacy from Belarusian society. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that Russia is not thinking about any kind of changing. A few words about Russian society, Russian media reaction. It's also strange, because on one hand, there are some articles, news from Belarus about the protests, about the social mood, with also explaining the reasons of it. But there are no, how to say, critical. Of course, there were some comparison between the situation in Belarus and Ukraine, but plenty of experts, journalists always stress that these 2 countries cannot be compared. The situation is totally different. And probably also the reason is that when we saw the flags with which people were marching, there are just only white, red, white flags, which means the flags of independent Belarus, no EU flags, no anti-Russian slogans. So for Russia is also very, interesting to observe what will be going on in Belarus. Of course, they also don't give direct translation from that, maybe except from a few independent media in Russia, because of some protest moods within the Russian society, because of protests going on in Khabarovsk and plenty of other places. And what about Russian elite reaction? I have no doubts that Putin was waiting for a friendly call from Minsk, and he will be always ready to deliver help to Belarus. But nowadays, because of the reasons I mentioned, no anti-Russian moods within Belarusian society, Russia rather don't want to engage military. I think that they will rather try to left the situation like it is. If, for instance, the economic situation of Belarus will deteriorate, which is very possible, probably they try to give some additional aid. But I'm also very interesting if they won't be also, I mean, probably they also will be thinking about presidential change in Belarus. And because I'm pretty sure that Putin has had enough of Lukashenko. He said plenty of times that you know you have to divide Belarus. I mean that Russia have to stop supporting Belarus to such an extent. And I'm pretty sure that if someone from, I don't know, opposition side will they will find someone who said that new Belarusian president will guarantee status quo for Russia. I mean that Belarus will stay in the union state of Russia and Belarus, that Belarus will stay as a part of CSTO organization, as a part of Eurasiatic Economic Union. The situation that the new president will have also carte blanche with Western countries can be also fruitful from Russia, because they will count on that to some extent, Western countries will sponsor Belarus, will try to help this country. So the reaction from in my point of view nowadays is very strange. But I'm also pretty sure that Russia is ready to act in every kind of option, including also military one, the last possible now, I would say, and. For them, but for them it will be the most costly. I mean, for Russia it will be the most costly variant. So I think that they are still waiting. Maybe they also will engage in some political changes in Belarus, especially as if they found someone who can replace Alexander Lukashenko and give Russia the possibility to realize their own interests. And also will be very interesting how Russia will also use this yesterday's declaration of Lukashenko that probably after the reform of the constitution, he can imagine some kind of new election, parliamentary and presidential one. But I also have to be very careful on this kind of suggestion from Lukashenko's side, because maybe he just want to win some time.
Thank you very much, and I absolutely agree with you. And afterwards, he also added in another video, I think shared already everywhere, that he, like, workers have to kill him first, and only afterwards elections will take place. So he kind of, it seems to us that he keeps trying to use different tricks and techniques how to talk to so many protesters. So definitely this is going to be a hard one for both Belarusians and international community to handle. And I would like to ask you also, Anna, do you have any information about the Russian elites? Are there any people from Putin's circle who are more in favor of military intervention, or more in favor of, let's say, Armenian model? I'm speaking now about the revolution when Pashinyan took a position of prime minister. So do you have any information about this, or maybe you analyzed it and have your own answer?
Unfortunately, I don't, but if I will try to guess, probably a majority of Russian elite will opt for Armenian kind of, how to say, revolution changes, because nowadays it occurred that they were totally pro-Russian in the end of the day. Of course, I'm also pretty sure that in Russian military HQ, probably they analyzed very seriously the possible option of military intervention. But as I said, it will be very difficult not only to intervene, because, you know, we also have to answer the question, will Belarusian army defend their own country or not? If there will be just a few units who will do this, it will be very costly for Russia. The more Belarusians are, how to say, very well known as a partisan nation. So probably it will be very easy for Russia to invade, but then you have to keep the whole country, and also to think about the international reaction. So as I said, probably the Armenian option, with also some kind of cooperation with the EU, some kind of document which regulates those kind of contacts, will be also fruitful for Russia.
And I will also quickly take one of the questions we got. Dear participants, I'm sorry, I won't be citing your names because there are too many questions already, but I hope I will be able to at least share your questions. So how possible do you think, Anna, is this scenario of Eastern Ukraine? There is a question about this, because are there any territories in Belarus who have similar moods or similar situation as it was in Eastern Ukraine 2014?
I don't think that Russia can use this Donbas scenario, because nowadays also we can observe that also Russia stuck in the deadlock with the whole story in Donbas. It won't play. It didn't play a good role for Russia. And one thing more, we have to also differentiate the situation in Ukraine in 2014 and nowadays in Belarus. In Belarus, nobody say that we have to Belarusianize our country, that Russian language have to be kicked off from public, that Russia is, how to say, our enemy almost, that no one also is trying to undermine the Russian position, the position of Russian culture, the position of Russian Orthodox Church, also Russian minority. So I think that this is a very huge difference, and believe me or not, nowadays, even Russia doesn't have any explanations why Russia should intervene in Russia. Of course, we can agree with or not with those slogans that Russia used in 2014 in Ukraine. I mean, the case of Russian minority language issue and so forth, so on. But nowadays, nothing like that is happening on Belarus. So here is the main difference. And also, we don't have how to say, the situation like it was, for instance, in Crimea and partially also in Donbas, that we will that in Belarus Russian minority lives in very concrete places. So it's not a case of even of eastern Belarus.
Thank you so much, Diana. Now we will be turning to our speaker from Berlin, York. So could you please share with us the most recent data you have about what is happening among the elites in Belarus? We know that there has been already a statement of the Belarus ambassador to Slovakia. Today, Spanish embassy has already spoken about discontent and disagreement of what is happening in Belarus. And also there have been plenty of questions regarding their siloviki. And do you happen to know whether there is any split there, and what are the current moods among the officials, and what is the chance some of them can actually turn their backs against Lukashenka?
Well, I think if we're honest with ourselves, that there is nobody who can answer this question with authority. Especially when it comes to the security apparatus, nobody is privy to a lot of the interaction that there is within the apparatus amongst the various agencies in the security apparatus. So I think we're all speculating here, okay? We do have a couple of indications over the last couple of days that there are people defecting from their positions, but it doesn't really happen in the higher echelons of power. I mean, whatever we have seen, individual security officers, others basically putting down their insignia or their positions. These were typically relatively low level officers or otherwise employees in state institutions. I think there's only two higher profile examples that we are aware of. The one is the director of the Kubalovsky Theater in Minsk, a former diplomat, ambassador to Paris, I believe, who resigned. That was a relatively sort of loud and very well mediatized affair that certainly many of us have been able to follow because many of the staff at the theater basically joined him in his protest. The other example that we have is a bit intricate, I would say. It's the Belarusian ambassador to Slovakia. Now that person has a history of super loyalty to Alexander Lukashenko and the apparatus. This is a very sort of interesting story. There are speculations even that this was basically a test case engineered by the apparatus itself in order to see how many other diplomats would follow him in this. So be that as it may, we basically have two high-profile examples, and we have the occasional fake news about another high-profile case. So yesterday evening, relatively late, there's a message going around. I think Nabini Biwai was the first to carry it, asking the question about Foreign Minister McKay. There were signals that he had resigned. That turned out to be a fake. So I think we have to be extremely careful also with the information that emerges on individual cases. I think what we can observe so far is that there still is a surprising cohesion amongst especially the higher levels of the regime. We can ask ourselves the question why that is. That may well be something to do with the very rapid development, because just as Anna said, that the Russians did not expect Lukashenko to potentially fall. They wanted him weak, but they didn't want him gone. I think a lot of the apparatchiks basically assumed that it may be a bit more difficult, but basically he stays, so why would we even think about it? What that typically means is if things happen so rapidly, there's no time for them also to take any precautions. If you're a higher level in a regime like this, there's a couple of things you need to do before you leave or before you turn yourself against that regime. There is documents that you want to destroy. There is documents that you want to collect. And there is ideally also some assets that you want to put aside. They haven't had time for that. So I think even if there are people toying with the idea of defecting, they need time to take some precautions also personally.
Thank you so much, Jörg. So as we've had already a few questions regarding the US and EU reactions. So how would you comment on that? Do you think it was sufficient and efficient what has been done? What do we expect from the meeting of the I think it's happening tomorrow, right? Wednesday. So how do you think there's going to be an effect on the dynamics of protests in Belarus also, but also of this of Lukashenko as asking help assistance from Russia?
Sure. First, I would say I think we would be well advised to separate our discussion between the EU and the US. So I don't think it makes sense to talk about them in the same breath here. The EU was fairly quick in responding to these developments. I think the responses were not just quick, starting on Monday, but they were also very strong. I mean, remember that already on Monday, you have a German foreign minister putting sanctions on the table as a potential response. I mean, that is not only fairly strong, but also comes from quarters like the German foreign ministry that typically is much more cautious here. So I think the responses cut across the spectrum. Obviously, a number of countries, especially those that are direct neighbors of Belarus, were particularly quick, visible, and at least in the case of Lithuania, also a very strong and almost activist type in many ways. So in that sense, I think the response, quick, strong, and also continued, not just one-off. There was a Foreign Affairs Council, a foreign ministers meeting that had Belarus on the agenda on Friday of last week. Several decisions there. One was to elaborate a list of individuals that would be sanctioned individually. That list, if all goes well, would be introduced by the end of the month. This is the kind of sanctions that the EU had before. It lifted its sanctions, most of it, by 2016. So where there's a step in the direction of personalized sanctions. I personally think that these sanctions were more important as a signal to Belarusian society that there is a response by the European Union, perhaps also to some extent to the apparatus and those individuals involved in election fraud and police violence. But I think the dynamics over the last week or so has been so rapid that by the end of August, these sanctions may not even be an appropriate instrument anymore. They may be overtaken by reality. So for the time being, let's just leave it at the signaling that they provided, which was important, I believe. There's obviously demands for prisoners to be released, all those detained in the course of the last couple of days. There is sort of ideas about humanitarian aid going to victims of repression. So the EU there, I think, is relatively good in its response so far. Now there is one shift now, obviously. Over the last week, developments in Belarus were basically driven by internal dynamics, and they stayed internal largely. What's happened over the weekend with Lukashenko's calls on Russia to provide assistance, that is security, potentially military assistance, Lukashenko has obviously made this a more geopolitical issue. And in my opinion, that is precisely the reason why the EU yesterday called for an extraordinary summit. Because now this is something that involves the entire region, that involves Russia, and that is something that has to be handled on the executive level. What I would expect from tomorrow is obviously more of the same. The first should be again a strong signal of solidarity to Belarusian society, condemnation of the actions, call for release of the remaining few thousand detainees, clarification of the status of those who are unaccounted for. There are people whom we don't know where they are. And ideally a stepping up and speeding up of the humanitarian aid that the EU can provide. But the more important item at the summit tomorrow will be the question of how to impress on Russia that it needs to engage constructively here, ideally in some initiative that establishes a dialogue in country between the government, the opposition, and civil society. This is something that will need Russian support. There are ideas of making this an initiative and dialogue under the auspices of the OSCE, of which both Belarus and Russia are members. So I think that the key question at the summit tomorrow will be really that issue of somehow figuring out a way of the EU and Russia combined, perhaps pushing for a negotiated exit from this situation. Because I think the other speakers intimated it, in many ways the situation is at an impasse. You have a strong mobilization that at the moment continues, but none of its demands have been met really. And on the other hand, you have a regime that is basically digging in its heels. And I think this is a situation that can last for some time, but it will, in order to be resolved at some stage, need an impulse, and that impulse probably has to come from the outside. If it's to be a constructive one, then that would include the EU as well as Russia.
Thank you so much, Dior, for this explanation. We will be getting back, I think, a bit later in terms of speaking about the recommendation to both the US and the EU, how they can act later, also from the transatlantic perspective. I would like to now to turn to Anna once again, because Anna unfortunately will have to leave us quite soon. So I would like to share with you, Anna, a question from Dmytro Shkurko from National News Agency of Ukraine. And I think it will be interesting for all of us to think about this. So to all our Belarusian participants, don't you think the extreme cruelty of police to the peaceful protesters is intended to lead Belarus society to the hot revolution and further swallow entire Belarus by Russian peacekeepers? We've seen it once in Ukraine, when intended violence was used to crush Ukraine to chaos and weakness. Duma Tikhanovskaya and other leaders of the protests are caution enough to understand this threat. And a short remark: there were no anti-Russian slogans during the Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity. All anti-Russian sentiments appeared after Russia has occupied Crimea and part of Donbass. Please do not be naive in this regard. What do you think about this, Anna?
Okay, so it's not like during Revolution of Dignity were no anti-Russian slogans, but there were pro-Western ones, which was enough for Russia, you know, to use it. But coming back to the question, as we saw, and probably I think that the pictures from Minsk and from some other places when girls and women and also some other people hug the policemen and they do not want to beat them, including also them from those special services like very famous OMON. And unfortunately, it was the authorities which tried to cause this angry between the society and the police. I mean militia, but I will call it like the police because it's the case of, I mean, the difference in language, so that's why I will use just the term of the police. Fortunately, it didn't work. And believe me or not, also when we saw the all protest movements in Belarus, they were totally peaceful. They weren't against anybody. You know, it's the other question why the police was so cruel and why they used so much force to stop all those protesters. How was this ideology working before the elections, and so far so on. But as far as I know, and as far as I know my Belarusian friends and people who lives there, they rather don't want to have any other kind of revolution. They want to the change of the power, but as peace and as calm as it possible.
Thank you, Anna. We will use your time a little bit more so that to make sure we use the most of you. I have a few very good questions from Stefan Schwed, who is asking, do you think Russia is an active or reactive actor here? And how actually the Armenian option is feasible? Because Armenia is an isolated state and it doesn't have any borders with the EU or NATO like Belarus. And can we actually avoid the geopolitical question here? Does self-limitation among the protesters today not mean a possible reorientation tomorrow? What do you think?
It's a very difficult question to ask because, of course, we cannot totally avoid those geopolitics, I will say. I hate this word, but fortunately or not, it's not possible because Russia was, is, and probably will be engaged, not probably, it will be engaged in Russian politics, Russian economics, and just, in Belarus economics, Belarus politics, and Belarus as such. So, you know, it will be very difficult to find out any good resolve for this whole story which had happened. So it's very difficult to say how it will look like this, because also the dynamics is so huge that we cannot predict what will happen today during night. Not to speak about what bigger picture.
And in terms of the difference with Armenia and the lack of borders for Armenia with EU or NATO members, what do you think? How can you comment on that?
Sorry, I missed that. On one hand, it plays for Belarus, on the other against, because nowadays Lukashenka, I mean, a few days ago, he used this argument, the slogan that it's NATO who is trying to interfere, that it's NATO who is trying to intervene in Belarus, and he was trying to use this these slogans to explain to society why he's behaving like he is. But on the other hand, in an Armenia case, the situation was different, because the situation there, we also cannot compare between Armenia and Belarus right now, but because of no direct border, there were other kind of risks to EU and to NATO countries. So that's why I think that that's why it's a better option for Belarus, because both EU and NATO, but first of all, I will put here EU, of course, are much more ready to react.
Thank you so much, Diana. We will now turn a little bit to speaking about the domestic issues, and then we will probably summarize with some recommendation. But perhaps just one last short question to you before you leave. I'm cautious of time. What is the role of Poland in this moment? I know that we all know that the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki and the leadership of the country have been very vocal recently in terms of arguing that this is unacceptable what has happened in Belarus. But also we remember that they, during the last 5 years, they really turned the previous government policies a little bit like 180 degrees and started to be more friendly with the authorities in Belarus and started to use different techniques and different strategies how to communicate with them. Do you think they will be able to preserve this model and to stay in good terms? And do you think they can actually become also a regional force to assist Belarus to go through this transformation? Taking into consideration also its cooperation with the US and NATO recently.
I mean, starting from the question, will Poland be able to maintain contacts from last 3-4 years? I have plenty of doubts, and not only because of Polish position, but also because of position of Belarusian authorities. Lukashenka once more started to blame Poland for interfering situation in Belarus. He also stressed that Poland is dreaming about changing the borders and to have the borders from 1939 and so forth, so on, which is not true totally. Of course, this double track approach, I will call it like that, because on one hand, Poland was engaging in some kind of dialogue with the authorities, but on the other hand, it also tried to help NGOs and some independent organization. Was very fruitful, in my opinion, the last 3-4 years, but nowadays the situation changed. And of course, Poland is engaged. I mean, Prime Minister Morawiecki also present a few days ago this solidarity program for Belarus, which main aim is just to help those peoples who were and who are repressed, students, those who are detained, just to give them possibilities to, for instance, go to Poland and ask for asylum status, for instance. And I'm also very sure that Poland will be very active on and within the EU, together probably with the Baltic states, especially with Lithuania, but also for sure with some other members like Sweden or the Netherlands, who were also very active and engaging in civil society issues, just to present some kind of plan for Belarus. Because believe me or not, but I think that I would just try to maybe give some very quick and brief recommendation, because as you mentioned, I have to unfortunately leave in 5 minutes, that we, as the EU and Poland especially, because Belarus is our neighbor, we will have to be prepared also for some political changes. As Jörg mentioned, if Lukashenko won't resign now, it doesn't mean that he won't be or forced, or he will just have to resign in, I don't know, a couple of months. Probably, I don't know if something like that will happen, but nevertheless, the EU should be ready for such kind of transition, for helping this social, how to say, social part of the round table, if there will be some kind of negotiations. Because in the very beginning of our meeting, Kastus stressed that there is no very visible leader, so it's also kind of problem for Belarus, and probably also for authorities with whom they have to speak. And probably it will be very good and necessary to prepare some such kind of plan for Belarus, how the EU can maintain the economy of this country, how we can develop political contacts, and also to give how to say, the carrot for the next authorities, and probably also the for nomenclatura, just not to have the one message that if something is bad, there will be sanctions imposed, but we have no positive agenda. I think that it's also very important to put it on the table. So I think that probably I will stop here.
Diana, thank you so much for finding time. We know you're very busy, and thank you so much once again. And we will be looking forward to having you with us again and again. And let's hope for more maybe positive news next time. I would like turn now to Alexei, because we've had quite a few questions regarding their repressions and the violence happening in Belarus. So I will probably already give you, Alexei, 3 questions, not just this one, so that we can start wrapping up our...
Sorry, but may I elaborate on the previous questions? Because I want to elaborate on some of the previous questions. I totally agree with Dr. Forbrig that the defections have been low level so far, but I can give additional information. Yesterday evening, the foreign ministry confirmed that the head of the Department of North America and Western Europe has resigned in protest. Today, I read the statement by the ambassador in Spain, where he criticizes the police violence, torture, and he calls for free and fair elections. So those are 2 examples. The other thing is there was a question about violence, why they use this massive violence. And we had a lot of these conspiracy theories that it was evil Russians who duped poor Lukashenko into using this excessive force so they can interfere. Well, what has happened, in my opinion, was that they wanted to suppress it quickly and use this shock and awe tactics so the people don't come the next day. And they miscalculated this scale of violence, and people came out, so they had to use more violence, and then they didn't have resources enough. I think that's what happened. Another thing is now the state propaganda, and this is the first channel of the state television, continues to be very hardcore propaganda, although some of their workers are on strike already. And some of the TV channels actually are choosing already changing their coverage. And actually the 4th channel, the regional channel in Grodno, yesterday was covering the protest live. They were showing the thousands of people in the main square of Grodno. So this is an important change. But this main propaganda machine is now painting Tikhanovskaya as anti-Russian. And yesterday they were saying that in her platform published before the elections, she supposedly wanted to close the borders with Russia, impose only Belarusian language, and take the country out of all agreements with Russia. So far, I think the main Russian propaganda media do not repeat these. They are saying that the protests are not anti-Russian, but they also say that, of course, if Lukashenko comes away and Tikhanovskaya comes, she's a puppet of the West, and it's possible that they will lose Belarus. And I think we have to follow closely on what they are saying, because if they start pushing this narrative that the first channel of the Belarusian state television is pushing now, if they start doing this massively, this would mean that they are preparing for some kind of military intervention. So far, I don't see any signs of this. I mean, not any, but don't see much of signs of this. And it's important also that the Russian Orthodox Church has been somewhat critical of the government already. And they were preaching by some high-level officials in the Belarus structure of the Russian Orthodox Church who condemned the violence and police brutality in open terms. And I think it's a very important sign because they're so much connected with Russia. And finally, Anna said that that's a problem for the authorities, that they don't have anybody to speak with. You know, it's not their problem. That's what they want, because there are several figures in the jail now among the political prisoners who could be real representatives and who could sit on the negotiating table, and they have real power and weight in the Belarusian society. I think Babarika is, I understand that it was just a slip of the tongue, but I think it's very important to understand that as soon as they release these key political prisoners like Babarika, this regime is gone. So they will hold onto these people as long as possible, because he was like skyrocketing in the polls as soon as he entered the race. So I think, and he is probably quite acceptable for Russians. So now I'm ready to take the questions. Sorry. About the violence.
Do you want to add something?
Yes,
do you
maybe
agree on
my-
Babarika that he's a great compromise figure for everyone?
He will be, but one thing, just to add what Alexei said, I don't say that nowadays it's a problem for Belarusian authorities, it's don't. But if we imagine that some kind of transition will start, let's put it like that, that sky is the limit, and some political changes are starting in Belarus, it will be very difficult also to the EU side to cooperate with somebody. I mean, of course, there are those who are nowadays in prisons, and but because they are in prisons, of course, the contacts with them are limited. So that is why it's the problem, taking into account the future possibility of developments just on this context. And I totally agree that you know, the authorities put also into prison Mikołaj Statkiewicz, put into prison Paweł Sewerynec and some other oppositioners, leaders, and it was done because of this political context that nowadays it's sad but true that Belarusian opposition has no visible leader who can take responsibility for what is going on the streets and who can drive the social mood. So that's it.
York, I think you wanted to add a few words on that.
The microphone is muted.
Yeah, please unmute yourself.
Dr. Forbrick, your microphone is muted.
No, John, maybe you can help York.
I'll just wait with a short remark then. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, got it. No.
You're at the top of your screen, the mute button.
It just froze for some reason. Okay, so maybe whilst we are helping York to unmute, Alexei and Anna, do you think that Tikhanovskaya is capable of overtaking this leadership figure from Babarika at this point whilst he's still in jail? How do you assess her capability to be able to play important role, a key role maybe in this negotiation over transition of the power it happens. Sorry, Yorko, do you want to?
Yeah, Yorko.
Yeah.
Sorry, my mouse didn't work. That's the point.
Okay.
On the question of no visible leaders, frankly, I think this is laziness, because these people are there and they will also emerge in the process. We've heard this ever so often in the past. At the same time, we know from similar processes elsewhere. Take 1989. Who knew in the West who the counterparts were in a country like Romania or in the Baltic states? This is, I think, a question that resolves itself in the course of events. At each of these factory gatherings, you have people emerging as those who are particularly articulate, who get the backing of their co-workers, who are able to present demands to factory directors. You have the same in other institutions. People emerge, leadership personalities emerge in these processes. That's one, and they will then obviously be the ones who you can rely on. So I think for anybody who's looking for eventual leaders that can take over some of the negotiation and political functions, I think they should just scan some of these gatherings that are taking place at the moment. Look at the video broadcast from Grodno Public TV yesterday of the gathering in front of the city hall. That's the personalities of tomorrow. The same goes, I think, for the list that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has published already. There is a whole lot of public personae in Belarus, starting with Svetlana Alexievich to musicians, to cultural figures, to business people. They are all there. We shouldn't just assume that there is nobody who can carry this development forward just because we are ignorant of public figures and processes in Belarus at the moment. So I'm really a bit tired of this argument, because ideally, yes, there would be one face to the entire thing, the ideal politician that would carry this forward, but that's not the case. It will be others who have to emerge, and they are in the process of emerging.
And then I will direct my question to all of you about Tikhanovskaya and her statement. Do you think she's capable of being such a leader from this group of those who already volunteered to become part of this coordination committee and had their reforms or transition?
If I may be the first, because I have to leave. I have plenty of doubts, but because of her family situation, her husband is still in prison, so he can be treated as, how to say, a hostage from the Belarusian perspective. And I wish her the best, but as I mentioned, because of other circumstances, I have plenty of doubts if she's really able to be such kind of leader. And thank you once more for the very interesting discussion, and for all people who are living in Belarus, we're keeping our fingers crossed. And what I can say, Żywi Belarus.
Thank you, Anna.
Then let me chime in on that same question. First of all, I think we should acknowledge what this woman has done over the last couple of weeks and months. She came completely unprepared. She has absolutely no ambition in this direction. She had no prior training. If you see her first appearances, if you see her later appearances, this is a huge development that this person has taken. The second, I think we should acknowledge what she has endured. The pressure she was put under in the office of Yermoshina at the Central Election Commission, the treatment that she was subjected to in order to read out a humiliating statement, and then to come back by the end of last week with a leadership role. I mean, that deserves respect. don't think we should be taking apart her personality without that respect and acknowledgement. Now, when it comes to her role in the process, at the moment she has been very clear all along that she has no ambition of becoming president of the country. She's seen herself as a transition figure that would have two tasks, basically: to make sure that all political prisoners are released and to call for fresh elections. She has never hidden that. She's been very clear about that. She has now pulled together a list already, quite impressive as I find, of people who could help with that transition from the societal side. Obviously, that list needs to be complemented with change-oriented people from inside of the apparatus. So this is not this is only one side of the dialogue at the moment that's presented there. There may be others that are missing and should be added here. But she's basically taking her visibility and also the credibility that she's earned herself with Belarusian society and tries to transfer this onto a mechanism or a group of people called Coordination Council. That is a very clever move, and at the same time, it's also a move in acknowledgement of her own shortcomings. So I think this is something very healthy that's happening here. My biggest sort of concern and in many ways also hope would be that out of the last statements of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the two that there were since Friday, there is a bit of an indication that the joint team, that famed trio of women and the campaigns they stood for, is not quite as united anymore. Tikhanovskaya's video address on Friday spoke of herself and her team. It didn't mention the others. So I hope that they're not falling apart at this early stage, because they're functioning very, very well together. Because you have Maria Kolesnikova's presence in Minsk. She is doing what Svetlana Tikhanovskaya cannot do because she's not in the country. So I just hope that they manage to stay together for as long as possible to sort of present a joint and broader face of those who are critical of the regime and stand for change.
May I?
Yes, please.
Well, I would say that she will definitely won't be the organizer. She would definitely won't be the organizing figure, but she would be a symbol of unity. And I think most of the people who are fighting inside Belarus recognize that she has won in the elections. And Dr. Forbrick said already that you need to expand this coordinating council that's been announced, to expand it with the state bureaucracy people, as he suggested. There's actually already one person from this Great Stone Chinese technical park there, which is, I think, an important sign. But I think even more important than to have some people from the state bureaucracy at this very moment is to have people who are starting the strikes in the key industrial centers of Belarus. And we were speaking about the leaders. I mean, Kolesnikova from Babarika team, she went to the Minsk wheel tractor plant after Lukashenka yesterday. And unlike Lukashenka, she was greeted warmly by the workers. Although she is the member of this bankers team, but at the moment, there's still this kind of unity, and it's important not to lose it. It's important to co-opt these people. Yesterday, I saw a person speaking in the city of Novopolotsk, which has a huge oil plant, Naftan, and oil chemical plant. And this woman, Volga Britikova, she is unknown, and she was speaking to a huge rally and giving these demands, the first of which was the resignation of Mr. Lukashenka. And she is the head of sales department at this plant. And she was speaking like a prime minister. My colleague told me, she speaks like a future prime minister of Belarus. So I'm totally agree with Dr. Forbrick. There are a lot of leaders, but these people need to be co-opted in this coordinating council, because for now they have this second string, old opposition people, culture people. Some of them are nice people, but I'm not sure they are able to make these negotiations. They can be, suppressed by charisma and by threats or whatever. So the key thing is to introduce these people into negotiating process. And the last thing, I want to to go back to this Armenia point, I spoke to Sergei Utkin from Primakov Institute in Russia before the elections, and I was asking him, would Russia accept, Armenian option in Belarus? And at that time, he was saying that Lukashenko will stay in power for sure. He's strong, etc., etc. But what he said is Armenia had no choice. Armenia had no choice because its geopolitical orientation is set in stone because of its limitations. Belarus does have a choice, and even if there's no pro-Russian, anti-Russian feelings and anti-Russian slogans, we are not going to be as lenient towards Belarus as towards Armenia, because Belarus still has a choice. They are afraid that even most pro-Russian replacement to Lukashenko will have more options than Lukashenko now has. So I think they will try to keep him if it's possible. If not, of course, they will try to negotiate and set this transition. But it's important to keep the eye on Russia, and for the West, it's important to try to be preventive and not to allow this military interference. But so far, it doesn't look like it's a viable option for them. But things can change very rapidly. I mean, I can remember Mr. Solovyov in this main propaganda speaking about one thing like one night, and the next night there are these people who were supposedly freedom fighters. They are already killing Russian children, whatever. So this can always happen.
Thank you very much, Alexei. As we are running really already past our deadline in terms of our timeline, I would like just to give a few questions to both you and York, and I think we should be wrapping up the discussion. So my question to you, Alexei, is something we didn't touch upon yet, is do you think, have you come across any proof of some secret burials of people who are missing? This was a question from David Kramer. So is there any information about this? And how would you actually assess the support? Is there any support of Lukashenko at the moment? And briefly, please tell us. So what are these people, where they are, and so on and so forth. And to York, my questions would be from our colleague Michal Baranovsky, the director of the Warsaw office, about the US response. How would you assess it, and why? And probably we would like York to summarize the recommendation for, as we agreed separately, the EU and the US on perhaps NATO. What should be the next steps for them in terms of the situation, what is happening?
Speaking about secret burials, we don't have any conclusive proof of secret burials. We do have a lot of information. Most of it looks like, conspiracy theories, like saying that 37 dead people are at this point, and you cannot get any proof of that. But one thing, we have indirect evidence that the authorities definitely hide the real number of dead. For example, on the first night of protests, there's a video footage of a person being run over by this police van, huge van, and the authorities recognized the first death only after, I think, 3 days. And that is a person who they accused that he was preparing an explosive device. But we had already footage from our readers and listeners that this person didn't have anything in his hands. It was obvious that they shoot him with this grenade. Probably it was a grenade because the wound looks like this. And then the AP footage appeared, and it was even there was a close-up. It was clear that the guy was not throwing anything. He didn't have anything in his hands. So it totally contradicted the official version. But also, I think they covered up the first dead with the recognition of those who they were not able to disapprove. So there's definitely more dead people than they recognize. What was the second question?
About the real support, whether there is any support.
There is some support. It's definitely more than 3%, which is the mean. But the main rally for Lukashenko, he said himself, "I'm standing in front of you, 50,000 people." It was obvious that it was maximum 10,000 people. But the state television was showing it in a different perspective. And these people were brought from all around Belarus, and some of them were enthusiastic really, and they were his supporters. Some of them were just there because they were afraid to be fired, because they were from these state enterprises, and mainly from the budget enterprises, things like state apparatus. And another thing, there is certainly some level of support, especially in the government and in the security services. In addition to the support itself, there's this feeling that they've made some crimes in the recent days, and if this situation changes, the power changes, they will have to pay the price for that.
Thank you, Alexei. York, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Let's not discuss the US response. It's just not worth it. There wasn't much of a response. Let's just face it. Okay, it took days for even a couple of congressmen to respond. It took almost a week for the Secretary of State to say something. I'm really, really angry about this because there basically wasn't much. I mean, it is a country that prides itself of supporting democracy the world over. It should do so also a bit faster than it has been in this case. When it comes to recommendations, and that will include eventually the US, I think first they need to be directed at the EU and its summit tomorrow. There's a couple that I would think are important. I mean, first, I mean, obviously the EU should clearly restate its solidarity with the Belarusian people. It needs to condemn what has happened again at the level of heads of states and governments. Certainly demand the release of remaining political prisoners, still in the thousands, those who have been arrested. Also demand clarity on those who are unaccounted for, provide humanitarian aid. I mean, there's an entire complex in the beginning that I think is important to do for Belarusian society. The second, I think, is it's important to counter Lukashenko's narrative of this being some form of attack by the West, of this playing out in a geopolitical field. It's not. He is making this up as he goes along because he's running out of options. So I think the EU needs to make clear that this is a domestic development in Belarus, and Lukashenko is now trying to internationalize it in order to mobilize Russia in his support. Third, I would say that the EU somehow needs to reach out to Russia and see if there's any willingness to participate in a multilateral approach to this. Something, as I mentioned, perhaps under the auspices of the OSCE. There are good reasons why Russia may want to be constructive in this case, at least at this stage. I also think that the EU does need to make it clear that if there is a unilateral interference from the Russian side, including military interference, then this would have to carry consequences by the EU. I think the demand has to be that the presidential elections need to be rerun. There cannot be a recounting of the votes. I mean, this is one of those diversion maneuvers that's coming out of some corners in the apparatus in Belarus. There has to be a rerun of the elections, and I think the EU should also commit to a very extensive domestic and international monitoring effort of those elections. And the last point, I think, is that the EU also mid and long term needs to think about the stability of the country in material terms. I think part of what it needs to think is a sort of macroeconomic stabilization of the country. The country is in dire straits economically. It's been in stagnation, if not recession, for a decade. its finances, its reserves are very limited. It owes a lot of money that needs to be paid this year. So I think there needs to be a stabilization very quickly as perhaps the situation clears itself. I think it's worth thinking about this now. And by the way, that sort of also material stabilization may also be a boon to Russia, because in many ways, Russia has been subsidizing Belarus for many years. So I think that there are a couple of very clear points that I would put in a list at the EU summit tomorrow. And the US would be well advised to largely follow suit. I think the best they can do in this situation is basically fully back whatever the EU comes up with in terms of proposals and action. Because the US is not in a position at the moment to mobilize much of an own response. I mean, it's obviously consumed by the upcoming elections. I think the best would really be if the US fell in line with what the EU is doing on Belarus at this stage.
Thank you, Jörg. And do you think that the sanctions which are targeted individuals, something the EU and also the US have used before, a travel ban, a freezing on financial assets, this can be effective this time? Or do you think that they should do something different against those who were involved into these repressions, into this brutal crackdown?
Look,
and also the falsification of election results. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, this is the sanctions debate is so vast and complex that I'm not quite sure we can cover it even remotely here. Put it this way: the sanctions were a signal, but they will not influence the situation at this stage. They're not even in place yet. By the time they come into place, there may be a completely different ballgame in Belarus already. The second is these personalized sanctions haven't particularly impacted the behavior of the regime in the past. I mean, the kind of sanctions the EU is preparing now were in place until 2016, and they did not shift the regime's behavior an inch. If you are serious about sort of sanctions, then you have to design them to address the material base of a system. The US have tried that in the late 2000s. Then you would have to roll out sanctions against some of the key companies and revenue earners, for instance. But the EU is not ready to do that and will not be ready. But again, at the moment, the sanctions question for me is a bit besides the point, because there are other things that the EU can and needs to do at this stage, rather than being distracted by this extremely complicated and politically also very controversial issue of sanctions. I think, yeah, we should keep the discussion on the things that can be done and also have an effect, perhaps short term, rather than talking about an instrument that typically, if it works at all, has a long-term effect.
Thank you so much. I know we're already 13 minutes out of our time, so I don't think we should keep anyone any longer. We've managed to cover, I know that not all the questions, I guess, but most of them. And in case you need another meeting, I think we should be maybe organizing a different one, maybe, I don't know, in a week. It will be up to Jonathan and our colleagues in Berlin, also in Warsaw, and also a guest who can participate. So Jonathan, over to you now.
Thank you. And I just want to again thank all of our speakers. Veronica too, thanks for moderating again. And I think we sort of, again, a record number of questions, I think highlights, and from both sides of the Atlantic highlights the real interest in what's taking place. So thank you to you. Thank you to, again, to our speakers. One thing just on the US side too, I just wanted to add, since I've been focused on this too, as I agree with Jörg, my hope is that the US will follow suit with the EU, provide some solidarity with those positions. There are already sanctions that are in place, some which could be reimposed, but I don't think that's going to get to the challenges right now. But my hope is that there'll be some leadership and a greater effort on the US side to work with the EU. And lastly, I think the most important thing is that that there's a great interest, but solidarity with Belarusians who are going through this process. This is about them. And I think Jorg pointed to, and others, about what areas can you be helpful from the U.S. perspective or the EU going forward, whether it's financial, economic engagement, macroeconomic, or political. But I think most important is to do what we're doing here today, which is to keep a spotlight on an important issue, both for the transatlantic community, particularly for those countries that border Belarus, but mainly about the Belarusian people. And so on that last note, yes, absolutely, we'll come back again, Veronica, sort of committed to keeping a spotlight on what takes place. And just based on the conversation today, you can see how complicated it is internally, but also the external challenges. And I think the best thing we could do is to keep having these conversations, dissecting what's taking place, educating policymakers and others on both sides of the Atlantic, and hearing directly from those who are on the ground in Minsk who have the greatest amount of information of anybody. So on that note, thank you again. Thank you to GMF Warsaw, to our colleagues there, Veronica, to you. And we look forward to our next conversation shortly to keep a spotlight on Belarus. So thank you to everybody for joining us. Have a good rest of your mornings, afternoons. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye.